cut your finger, and you already know how the story ends. It bleeds, it hurts, it scabs, and a week later there is a small pale scar where the wound used to be. Lose the very tip of a finger, and if you are lucky it might grow back a little. Lose a whole finger, or a hand, or a leg, and it is gone for good. Your body does not know how to build a new one. That is simply the deal every mammal has quietly accepted. And then there is this creature, sitting in a tank of water with what looks like a permanent smile on its face and a crown of feathery pink branches sprouting from the sides of its head. Take one of its legs, and it does not panic, and it does not scar. Over the following weeks, it simply grows the leg back. New bone, new muscle, new nerves, new skin, all of it in the right place, the right size, connected to everything else, working perfectly, as if the injury had never happened. And it will do this again and again and again for its entire life. This is the axolotl. And by the end of this video, you will understand not just how it pulls off the most complete regeneration in the animal kingdom, but why your own body refuses to, and what our species might one day learn from a smiling salamander that never grows up. So let's start with what it actually is, because almost everyone gets this wrong. The axolotl is not a fish, and it is not a lizard. It is an amphibian, a type of salamander, and its scientific name is Ambystoma mexicanum. In the wild, it comes from just one place on Earth, a network of ancient lakes and canals near Mexico City, most famously the waters of Xochimilco. Those feathery pink or purple plumes fanning out from its head are not decoration. They are external gills, and they are the first clue to how strange this animal really is. Because most salamanders, like most amphibians, begin life in the water as gilled larvae, breathing through those feathery organs, and then grow up. They lose the gills, develop lungs, and crawl out onto land as adults. The axolotl refuses. It reaches adult size, it becomes fully mature. It can breed and lay eggs, and yet it never transforms. It keeps its gills, keeps its fin tail, and stays in the water its whole life, essentially a giant baby that grew up on the inside while staying a larva on the outside. Biologists have a word for this. They call it Neoteny, holding on to juvenile features into adulthood. And that eternal childhood is not just a quirk, it is tangled up with the axolotl's most astonishing gift. Now to the real magic. What actually happens when an axolotl loses a limb? When you or I are wounded, our bodies race to close the gap as fast as possible. Cells rush in, the edges are pulled together, and a tough patch of collagen is laid down to seal the wound. That patch is scar tissue. It is quick, it is strong, and it is a compromise. It stops us bleeding and keeps out infection, but it is not the original tissue. It cannot grow a new finger. It is a plug, not a rebuild. The axolotl does something completely different. When it loses a leg, it does not immediately scar over. Instead, a thin layer of skin cells quickly migrates across the wound to cover it, without forming that thick scar. And then, underneath, something remarkable begins. The cells right at the wound site start to change. Muscle cells, bone-forming cells, and other specialized cells near the stump appear to switch off their adult identity. They de-differentiate. In plain terms, they roll back the clock, becoming more like flexible, unspecialized cells again, almost as if returning to an earlier, more childlike state. These reset cells gather into a small bud at the tip of the stump. Scientists call this bud a blastema. And the blastema is the beating heart of the whole miracle. It is a cluster of cells that seems to remember exactly what is supposed to be there. It knows this is a front left leg. It knows where the elbow goes, where the wrist goes, how many fingers there should be, and in what order. Guided by chemical signals that map out position along the limb, the blastema cells multiply and then respecialize, becoming bone here, muscle there, nerve and blood vessel and skin, rebuilding the entire limb from the shoulder down to the tips of the toes. And here is the part that still stuns researchers. The finished limb is not a rough approximation. It is essentially perfect, correctly proportioned and fully functional, with no scar at the join. And if legs were the whole story, that would already be extraordinary. But the axolotl does not stop at legs. Its regeneration is almost absurdly broad. Damage its heart, and it can regrow heart muscle rather than simply scarring it, which is exactly what a human heart does after a heart attack, when dead muscle is replaced by stiff scar that never beats again. Sever its spinal cord, and the axolotl can regrow the nerve tissue and in many cases recover the movement below the injury, something that for us remains one of medicine's hardest walls. It can regenerate its jaws, parts of its eye including the retina, and even portions of its brain. Whole sections of complex, delicate tissue rebuilt, and it does not run out of chances. This is not a one-time emergency trick that leaves the animal weaker each time. An axolotl can lose the same limb again and again across its life and regrow it every single time, as good as new. Take a moment to sit with that. An animal that can, in a very real sense, repair almost any part of itself over and over for years. Which brings us to the question that should be nagging at you by now. Why? Why can a soft, palm-sized salamander do this, while you, a vastly more complex animal, cannot regrow so much as a fingertip past childhood? It is not that our cells are somehow weaker. In fact, we start out with impressive powers of our own. A human embryo in the womb can heal wounds without scarring, and very young children can sometimes regrow the very tip of a finger. Somewhere along the way, we lose that. And the leading explanation is not that mammals failed to invent regeneration. It is that we traded it away. The current thinking is that our bodies made a deal, favoring speed and safety over perfect rebuilding. For a large, warm-blooded, long-lived animal moving through a world full of bacteria, a fast scar that seals a wound in hours is a powerful defense against infection and blood loss. Rebuilding a limb, by contrast, takes weeks of leaving cells in that flexible, reset, childlike state. And that same flexibility, cells that can roll back their identity and multiply freely, is uncomfortably close to what happens when a cell turns cancerous. So one idea is that mammals clamp down hard on that regenerative flexibility, partly as a defense against tumors, accepting scars as the price of keeping our cells firmly locked into their adult jobs. Fast healing and lower cancer risk in exchange for giving up the rebuild. The axolotl, it seems, never signed that contract. So what is the axolotl actually doing differently at the wound? A huge part of the answer appears to lie not in some exotic organ, but in how its immune system responds. When any animal is injured, immune cells flood to the wound. Among the most important are cells called macrophages, whose name literally means big eaters because they gobble up debris, dead cells, and invading microbes. In a mammal, that inflammatory response, while it clears the wound, also helps drive the formation of scar tissue. In the axolotl, researchers have found something telling. If you remove these macrophages, the animal's remarkable regeneration fails, and it scars instead, much as we would. Put them back, and the power returns. Somehow, in the axolotl, these immune cells are not just cleaning up the wound, they are helping to orchestrate a rebuild, setting the stage for that blastema to form and steering the whole process toward regrowth rather than repair. The difference between growing a new leg and growing a scar may come down in large part to how the body manages that first wave of healing and what its immune cells are told to do. And that is a genuinely hopeful thought, because it suggests the machinery for regeneration might not be something we lack entirely, but something we have switched off or aimed in a different direction, all of which makes the axolotl one of the most studied animals in modern biology. Its genome, the complete set of its genetic instructions, turned out to be enormous, around 10 times larger than our own, one of the largest genomes ever fully mapped, which made it a serious challenge just to read. Laboratories around the world now keep and breed these salamanders specifically to watch regeneration happen in real time, tracking exactly which cells move where, which genes flick on, and which signals summon the blastema into being. The dream behind all this work is enormous. If we could understand precisely how the axolotl coaxes an adult body into rebuilding itself, we might one day nudge human tissue to do a little more of the same. Not fantasy limbs regrown overnight, but the far more grounded hope of healing hearts without crippling scars, of coaxing damaged spinal cords to reconnect, of persuading wounds to rebuild instead of merely patch. The axolotl is not a magic answer. It is something better. It is a working example, living proof that a vertebrate body, built from the same basic toolkit as ours, can do this at all. And here lies the great irony at the center of this story. The axolotl is, at the same time, both one of the most common and one of the most endangered animals on the planet. In laboratories, classrooms, and home aquariums, there are now huge numbers of them, bred over countless generations, so familiar that many people assume they are perfectly safe. But in the wild, in the ancient canals of Xochimilco that are their only native home, the axolotl is critically endangered, hanging on by a thread. That single habitat has been drained, built over, and polluted as Mexico City has grown around it. Its waters fouled and crowded with introduced fish that eat young axolotls and outcompete the adults. Wild surveys have found so few that some searches turn up almost none at all. So we are left with a creature that can rebuild almost any part of its own body, yet cannot, on its own, rebuild the one leg it needs to survive. The animal that masters regeneration is losing the fight against extinction in the only place it truly belongs. And it is worth being honest about the limits of what we know, because the truth is more interesting than any hype. Scientists do not yet fully understand how the axolotl does what it does. They have mapped many of the pieces, the blastema, the dedifferentiating cells, the guiding immune signals, the genes that switch on, but the complete instruction manual, the full logic of how a body reads its own map and rebuilds itself flawlessly, is still being pieced together. There is no pill that turns a human into an axolotl, and there may never be a simple one. What there is a real and rapidly advancing field of regenerative medicine quietly learning from this animal year by year. Every experiment that reveals how the axolotl steers a wound toward rebuilding rather than scarring is another line decoded in a manual that might, one distant day, be partly rewritten for us. So the next time you see one of these creatures, drifting in a tank with its feathered gills and its endless, unbothered smile, try to see it for what it really is. Not just a strange and cute aquatic pet, but one of the most remarkable survivors and teachers on Earth. An animal that never grows up, and in never growing up, kept a power the rest of us lost, the ability to lose a part of itself and simply build it again. It is a living reminder that the limits we take for granted, the scars we assume are permanent, might not be laws of nature after all, but choices our bodies once made, and might, with enough understanding, one day learn to unmake. So here's what we would love to know from you. If human medicine could borrow just one of the axolotl's powers, which would you choose? The regrowth of a lost limb, a heart that heals without scarring, or a spinal cord that can mend itself? Tell us in the comments. And if this changed the way you see that little smiling salamander, stay with us, because the natural world is full of impossible things that turn out, on closer inspection, to be completely, wonderfully real.